You are a force of nature, sir. I've seen the last couple of videos have been so terrific. You have a great style, of course, but you've also chosen a sort of very direct message to the American people. And one of the messages, maybe we'll start with this, then I want to get into the garbage thing. And also, I thought you did something very effective in reading a column from the Las Vegas Sun. And maybe we can we'll pick out a couple of excerpts from it. But to the point, you are confident that through all this mess, through all the back and forth, through all the faux controversies, the real controversies, the misstatements, the corrections, through the Madison Square Garden hate fest, through all of it, you believe that Kamala Harris, and you're confident Kamala Harris will win.
Yes. I mean, I'm confident that I don't think it's Kamala Harris winning. I think that it's American freedom winning. I think that it's American democracy winning. This is not a personality contest. You know, this is not just her versus him. This is about America, what we want for America. And I sometimes wish that the Democrats were better at making this case because, you see, they've had to do something that's quite unusual in politics, especially in the presidential campaign. She's not just having to talk about her own policies on the economy and on immigration and all the stuff that we're used to. She's also having to remind us of this threat of authoritarianism. This is a whole new conversation that we didn't ever really have to have before. We didn't do it in 2016 because Trump was a bit of a joke candidate who was never going to win, except he won, right? Now we know, and it happened in 2020, and people did not choose authoritarianism in 2020. So here we are in 2024, and yet again, because his rhetoric has got worse, I mean, that Madison Square Garden rally was like a gift to the Democrats because it put on full show the clarity, with absolute clarity, that they are racist, that they are xenophobic, that they are bigoted, that they are everything that we feared. And it was all put, and Melania can't speak English, it was all put into one place. And I was like, wow, you know, I think I said to you a few weeks ago when we last spoke on this show, I was like, just let Trump keep talking, right? The more Trump talks, the less chance he has of winning because of his issues with his insecurities and his mental health, his personality disorder, the narcissism, and also the fear of going to prison, right? He doesn't want to have to face the music with Jack Smith. So really, for him, this is a last-ditch attempt. So what happens to a person like him when they're up against it? They don't become softer and kinder and more generous. They become more aggressive, more angry, and more vitriolic. And so that's what's happened. It has played out exactly as we predicted. So Harris is having to point out that he is a threat to democracy as well as sell her own wares, lay out her stall, as we say in the political media training that I used to do. And it's tough, you know, because he makes a whole lot of noise, Mark. But noise doesn't necessarily mean votes. And that's really my major point here.
It seems as though there are constituencies that should truly be as a block voting against Donald Trump. Now, of course, you know, I think, sort of what you've just said, the constituency that should be voting against Donald Trump is pretty much everybody. I mean, I don't see how you even have someone who engineered a coup against this country, and he is in a dead heat with the other candidate. I don't care if the other candidate is Albert, who produces the show. I mean, it just wouldn't matter. This guy is, in my view, so damaged, or should be so damaged, by those events of January 6th and trying to engineer that coup. Leave aside the other lawlessness he was associated with. He really getting into the Justice Department, the IRS, putting his people in. And this is, I understand, tepid compared to what he's going to be doing. But he actually did try to direct various instruments of government toward his enemies when he was president already. He tried the Zelensky thing, trying to get the, that whole thing, the quid pro quo.
That was years ago, though, Mark. Think about how long ago that was when he tried to extort Volodymyr Zelensky and he gets impeached for it. And it's like, that was just like the first of the house of cards collapsing for Donald Trump. He is not a winning candidate. He is a winning marketeer. He is a winning showman. He is the P.T. Barnum of U.S. politics. And he, as an individual, is everything that's wrong with America. Everything that's wrong with this country is encapsulated into one man. This idea that being wealthy is equal to being successful. That's the biggest misnomer, and yet America is built on that. If you're rich, that's the secret to success. And where I'm from, all the best people are poor. The people that do the most important jobs, the nurses, the key workers, they are all poor, and they are the best people in society.
Well, let's be clear. That's true here. But what you're talking about is what we value in American society.
Yes.
We don't value teachers and nurses. I understand we value nurses during COVID and we clap for them at whatever hour. But apart from that, we don't. But I think in Britain, too, to be fair, I just think worldwide, wealth is viewed as success, Anthony Davis.
In England, we look down on the wealthy.
Really?
Yeah, we look down on the wealthy. You don't show your wealth, and, the wealthy are considered to be just dickheads.
Well, it's interesting. It seems like a gold-encrusted royal sort of show every time.
No, it's the opposite. I mean, people like Richard Branson, who is our greatest entrepreneurial success in England, is an exception. People love him because he's been around since forever. He's completely self-made. He started a record shop in school, and that became Virgin Records. And the story, Tubular Bells, the whole thing, Virgin Atlantic. So, he has a great story to tell, but he is very much a working class person at heart. And so we just don't revere the super rich in the UK. And anyway, the people that have all the money in the UK tend to be Russian or Saudi, Chinese. Most of the wealthy British gentry that you see on the Crown, the Crane, they have spent most of their great riches fixing the roof of their country house. All the money's gone. The only money they have is in the property, and no one wants to buy it because it leaks.
This is from No Contendo, who asks you in the super chat, is 45 steamrolling La Savita and Wilds regarding the garbage? In other words, his political people, the people who are managing his campaign, regarding the garbage truck commentary. Thoughts on medical episode? Will he blame others or mask it something else? Give me your thoughts on. Trump doesn't take advice from any of his political people. I think the garbage truck thing was something that his people, political people, probably did dream up, don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that was a response to Joe Biden making that off-the-cuff remark about Trump supporters being garbage. But of course, the word garbage came from the Madison Square Garden so-called comedian who said Puerto Rico was a floating island of garbage. So, and unfortunately for Joe Biden, who is, an older guy who has thoughts in his mind and they don't always make it to his mouth on time. I do wish Biden would take a bit of a back seat in this last week.
Yeah, I'm surprised.
just for safety. But, it doesn't stop him from being, a great statesman, an elder statesman and a great president. But he doesn't need to be talking to the press right now. Kamala Harris has enough of a difficult job to do facing up against Donald Trump. But, I enjoyed watching Trump trying to climb into that garbage truck. He couldn't get the door open.
We were going to show
couldn't get into it. I mean, it was like, I was just like, let's just watch this for a while, I want to see him get in and get out and get in and get out. And I could do that all day.
Albert, run a little bit, though, of the Trump in the garbage truck, his remarks. I thought his remarks were worth listening. Now, he starts with he's already in the truck now. You've heard Anthony describe how he efforted his way in. But he starts with Elon Musk, and it's just this blithering kind of, he's a genius, we've got to support our geniuses. You realize, wow, his administration will be, it'll be populated by these people that he essentially will be unplugged from his own administration. But anyway, go ahead. And people like Musk are going to take over. But anyway, this is Trump riffing from the passenger seat of this garbage truck. Go ahead.
No, I don't know. Elon is a great guy. He's one of our geniuses, and we have to protect our geniuses. We have to take care of our geniuses. There aren't too many of them. Yes, please. No, I love Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico loves me. I don't know anything about a comedian. I love Puerto Rico. Nobody's done more for Puerto Rico than me. I took care of them when they had the big hurricanes, and nobody gets along better with Puerto Rico and the Puerto Rican people than me. They love me and I love them. Go ahead. What do I want? I don't know anything about the comedian. I don't know who he is. I've never seen him. I heard he made a statement, but it was just a statement that he made. He's a comedian. What can I tell you? I know nothing about him. I don't know why he's there. You put comedians up, and I guess he went on earlier in the show. I don't know who he is.
Is Steve Bannon going to campaign with you? Is Steve Bannon going to campaign with you now that he's out of prison?
I don't know, but I think he's a terrific guy. I think he was treated very unfairly.
Okay, thank you. That's he was talking about Steve Bannon there at the end. You know, it's tough to know Anthony Davis, but I am certain that if Musk were able to run amok, and I've talked about this for years because there's been an effort to try to control Elon Musk. There are regulatory agencies that have been trying to, I mean, even the IRS has tried to get tax money from Elon Musk for any number of issues with SpaceX and with his other holdings, Tesla among them. But I just know that his power will grow so immensely that this guy who's already immensely powerful, the government depends on him for any number of things associated with the launching of satellites, with the rescuing of astronauts, or all these things. And that's just the space part of his holdings. I think he will control the government in the kind of old school oligarchical way that the Russian government is controlled.
I don't think he's getting anywhere near the government. That's because Donald Trump's not going to win, and Kamala Harris wouldn't touch Elon Musk with a barge pole. But you're right, there is a level of hypocrisy in as much as, yeah, getting those 4 astronauts back or 3 astronauts back from the International Space Station when NASA failed to do it with Boeing's rocket that failed. I mean, yeah, Musk has made himself indispensable, and with no equipment more so than the satellites that we're all using for communications. I mean, Starlink it's genius what he's done, and he has now basically made himself an indispensable part of world culture, effectively. But also when it comes to wars, and we've heard that now Putin maybe was talking to Musk, telling him to turn off those satellites that prevented communications in Ukraine during the war. I mean, that stuff is nuts. I mean, this is the stuff from like a Batman movie script. It's crazy. You wouldn't believe it if they didn't tell you. But let's just go back to Trump for a second in that garbage truck, which is where he belongs, incidentally. Firstly, what color was he wearing in the face? I mean, the only border crisis he needs to worry about is the blending between the makeup and his pink skin. That's the first thing. But secondly, denying knowledge of the comedian, denying knowledge of what was said about Puerto Rico, claiming that nobody loves Puerto Rico more than me and they love me more than anybody. Those 3 or 4 statements are all so clearly a lie. And if that isn't a clear and blatant example that Donald Trump thinks that he is capable of saying anything and having people believe it, I mean, that should be a reflection on the whole Donald Trump phenomenon and campaign. Because of course he knew who that comedian was. Of course he knew what he said. Of course he watched it. Of course he's heard it back. Of course he's had crisis meetings about it and how to deal with it. Why do you think he's climbing on this garbage truck? The whole thing is because of this comedian. So I just wish that people would recognize that Donald Trump is a lifelong liar and nothing he says is true, whether it be about Puerto Rico or whether it be about the economy or whether it be about immigration. It's just not true. And he's a fraud. He's a clown wearing clown makeup. Look at that face.
His chess moves also are so predictable, and we've seen them so many times, but apparently they're effective with some, they effectively play off the media. It's sort of like asked and answered. So in this case it is, what do you think about the comments about Puerto Rico? Aren't you concerned about the reaction among Puerto Rican Americans? He says, I love Puerto Rico. I was great to Puerto Rico when I was president. I took care of Puerto Rico when the hurricane hit.
Eventually.
I was the best, which is, by the way, a complete falsehood as well.
Yeah.
As you know, they were without power for 11 months. It was the second longest blackout in the history of this country. He worked, I don't know how hard he worked, but it was under his administration to reduce funding to Puerto Rico, relief funding.
Yeah.
He clearly views them as others. And I'd suggest that community, the Puerto Rican community, north of 400,000 of whom live in Pennsylvania, a swing state, should vote against this guy. I mean, if you care at all about your own identity as it relates to Trump.
I think that minority groups, I think that marginalized societies, cultures, because we often talk about, the LGBTQ plus community. I don't personally think there is an LGBT plus community. Yeah, there'll be pockets in places, of course. But, these communities are amongst us. People live amongst us. Trans people already exist. It's not something that's been made up by Democrats, been around since time began. So anybody that is marginalized or anybody that comes under Donald Trump's criticism, and I include women in addition to people of color and immigrants and asylum seekers and anybody, none of those groups, and I include myself in it even though I don't get to vote, because I think of myself as an immigrant, they won't be voting for Donald Trump. That is a huge movement. I mean, 51% of the electorate are female. They will not be voting for Donald Trump. Sure, a few Republican wives will be voting for Donald Trump. But I mean, have you seen these new videos from Kamala Harris and the Lincoln Project about how husbands are hoping that their wives vote for Trump, but when they get into the booth, that's a safe space. They can vote for Kamala Harris and they don't have to tell anybody. I mean, that is genius. I was very moved when I saw these commercials because I was like, wow, I can't believe this. It's almost like The Handmaid's Tale, this kind of patriarchy that America is fostering.
Sure.
And this is the opportunity for all of those people, women and minorities, to just break out of this cycle of criticism, misogyny, and the patriarchy. And I think that's what this vote is all about. It's not as simple as Democrats versus Republicans. This is a much bigger election, a special election almost. And I have no doubt that Kamala Harris will clinch it.
Well, the other plan, of course, in addition to the vote and trying to win legitimately, is essentially throwing sand into the gears of the election process, right? We've talked about this on the show for so long. I mean, months and months and months and months. And by so doing, you create just a little bit of chaos. You don't need a lot of chaos. You just need a little bit of chaos because you just need to block certification of enough votes to prevent either candidate from making it to the 270 threshold in the Electoral College. And then it goes to the House of Representatives, as you know. So it seems, and even it seems as though it was alluded to the other day by Trump, his secret with the House of Representatives. It was finally explained to him in basic enough ways so he could understand it,
right.
That this could really be the key to returning him to the White House.
I mean, that's the tragedy of this whole storyline, is the popular vote versus the Electoral College. It shouldn't be like this. And America's not the only country to suffer from this. We have the same in England. With our system, we call it first past the post. It's anything but first past the post. It just doesn't work like that. But, people don't understand proportional representation. And then we were given a referendum about it in the UK, and people chose not to go for that because they didn't really understand what it meant. But you're right. There is a coup in place for this election. We are not going to get a result on the 5th or 6th or 7th or 8th of November. We may not get a result for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And I really hope we get to an inauguration in the middle of January. It's very, very worrying that the system is designed to be played. And Republicans, they don't care anymore. They know they can get away with it because they've got the Supreme Court on their side. They've got all of these brainwashed MAGA Republican Congress people who will support Trump no matter what, despite all of his criminality and his failings. And they only want to own the libs at whatever cost, even if it means crashing US democracy. And so really the great test of this is going to be how the world looks on at America's democratic process. And if they go through with this coup, which I have no doubt that they will, to install Donald Trump illegitimately, then that is going to destabilize democracy on a planet-wide scale. It's not just about America. And world markets will be affected, and our economy will be affected, let alone before Trump starts to implement his crazy tariffs. So there is so much more riding on this election than just a female candidate versus a male candidate. This is a massive cultural change, which we need to start describing as regime change. And that's a phrase that is often used for when, we as Americans have gone into other countries, like Iraq or Afghanistan, and tried to impose a Western-style democracy on their system. Or when a despot takes over a country or seizes it with the military. That is regime change. Americans have never had to live with regime change. And if it happens here, everything will be different about living as freely as we did the day before Trump seized power.
And most certainly, as you described, the markets, if you just care about your money, will be dramatically affected to the negative. Investors like stability, and show them the kind of upheaval, political upheaval, that you will see in America, and you will find investors pulling money out of the United States stock market and U.S. businesses. It no longer will be a stable place to invest. It's always been the most stable place to invest. So if you only care about the dollars and cents, it seems to me you don't want this craziness that the GOP is prepared to hatch.
The U.S. is the largest economy in the world. It represents 26% of world GDP. It's gigantic. It's doing really well right now, right? The stock market is having record closing bells. The economy itself, from a day-to-day basis, inflation is coming down. That was just announced again yesterday. Inflation is coming down. The unemployment numbers are better than they have. We've restored our economy now to pre-pandemic levels, effectively. But the Democrats struggle to communicate this. They're still pretending that there's work to be done. Well, there is, but look at the numbers right now. The economy is really strong. Yes, we don't all feel it because of price gouging and everything that goes with that. But, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And right now it ain't broke. And people need to realize that.
The last thing I'll say is that taking a blowtorch to the regulatory state is what House Speaker Mike Johnson was saying about Donald Trump's new administration. I mean, there's clearly and he even mentioned, we have a list of things that we'll be doing, and we'll be doing this, taking a blowtorch to the regulatory state. And so you'll see much of this is the sort of Steve Bannon agenda executed upon, because Johnson and the GOP now know how to get stuff done along those lines.
Johnson didn't know he was being filmed when that clip was recorded, by the way. He thought he was in a safe space. So he was speaking to Republicans in a small room where he, next to a cardboard cutout of Donald Trump, because he couldn't get the real man there himself. And was saying stuff that we don't really hear out of the mouth of Mike Johnson, because he is quite reserved. He plays his cards quite close to his chest, and he likes to pretend that he's this kind of very God-fearing man. But actually, he is an insurrectionist. He was one of those proponents of that, of the insurrection surrounding the voting machines. And he was pushing conspiracies. Remember, Dominion settled with Fox for $787 million. There was no fraud, and yet Mike Johnson kept pushing that. And then he came from obscurity and got the speaker job. He is a very dangerous individual, and Donald Trump is relying on him to try and swing this election in a way that Mike Pence could not be trusted. And there is a huge difference between those two. They might both present as, as kind of Christian nationalists on the outside, But on the inside, there is some deeply flawed issues going on with Johnson, and he just is hungry for power.
And he is a radical in terms
Yes.
of his desire to change government and to execute, as you say, on this. It's a Christian theocratic agenda, but it includes a lot of other things too. I mean, the entire regulatory state, as he sees it, would be dismantled, and Musk would help. I mean, if indeed Trump wins, I mean, Musk apparently will have a big seat at the table, but.
Well, he was
that
lying about
revealing.
the free market. He was saying that if you do away with all the regulation, then the free market can do its thing, and that is simply not true. Regulation is what keeps us safe. And this is the fundamental difference between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans would prefer a lawless society where only the wealthy survive, because the wealthy can avoid their own water filtration systems. But everybody else is going to die of diphtheria. That's basically what it comes to. You know, you should watch there's that rather brilliant movie called Elysium. Have you ever seen that?
No.
It's who's the guy who plays Jason Bourne? He's
Matt Damon. No,
Matt
I
Damon.
have seen it. I have seen it where where the elite live on a hovering area above the planet.
With medicine and with all of the the medical equipment to live forever.
They live in like this Four Seasons hotel
That's
that
right.
hovers above the planet.
And then everybody else lives on the Earth, which is riddled with disease, and there's cyborgs there. And I mean, it's a really interesting film, but the metaphor in that movie couldn't be closer to this kind of hellscape reality that we will face if Donald Trump wins. The gap between the rich and the poor will only grow. And he's not on the side of the poor, and he never has been. And I only wish that the turkeys would stop voting for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I mean, that's so well put, of course. And when you look at the toxification of the environment, and then you look at the regulatory structure that you talk about, the protections, consumer protections.
Yeah.
I always look at these regulations. I mean, I understand there can be the cumbersome regulations that can be too much, layers of it that might be too much. But in general, the protections that are in place for the environment and for consumers are there to protect the environment and consumers. And so the future that you describe, I think, is an accurate one. A market that is unregulated with no protections for consumers, it will be full of the kind of thing that is galling, insider trading and running amok, essentially stealing from the U.S. Treasury, which is part of what the last administration tried to do. The Trump administration did that as they directed COVID funds toward people they knew. They directed wall funds to people who were big donors for Trump, who'd never built anything in their life. As a result, they sort of built a portion of a wall at 10x what it would have been otherwise. And that's even allowing for the fact that they started building this ridiculous wall to begin with.
The GOP have never had a policy for regular working people, for regular Americans. Not a single policy has ever been announced by the Republicans to benefit regular people. They just have this myth about trickle-down economics. If we protect the rich, then the money will trickle down to the workers. And that is a completely flawed concept that was actually created by the rich to keep the poor quiet and hopeful.
Albert, play for Anthony Davis the IG thing that I sent to you. I thought this was really great. And why these ads don't run more frequently. These are the sorts of ads. This is a real guy talking about, he's a real tradesman talking about dealing with Trump during the time that he was in the running for president and then in the last administration. So I feel these are the kinds of things that should be in campaign ads for Kamala Harris. Go ahead, Albert.
This man's never been for the working man, okay? You know, when this guy was a builder in New York City, okay, where he cut his teeth, he ripped off every tradesperson that he could. He ripped off every contractor he could. He put more small businesses out than any government body would ever be able to do. And when he was a president and he was elected the first term, building trades had him come to D.C. He spoke at the NAV2 conference. I was there. He promised us that he was going to be a building president. He was going to build buildings, and he was going to use our people to build them. He told us that he was going to have an infrastructure bill done by Tuesday. He said he was going to help some of these pension plans be fixed by Wednesday. Well, you know what? Just like all of his other promises to his supporters, he didn't deliver to us either, okay? History speaks for itself. This man's never...
Yeah. I mean, I love that for its, its veritas cut through nature. You know, it's the truth.
Sorry, I'm just muting myself. But why don't we hear that stuff from the Democrats in the campaign? You know, and this is what frustrates me, is that there is often a whole lot of language, but the nitty gritty, in fact, after I finish talking to you, I'm going to be making a video about this, about the very clear language that you need to use. I kind of think it's that we don't, in America, maybe we don't like to criticize billionaires because we'd all like to be one. And that is the opposite of the European view, that why would you want to be a billionaire? They're just unhappy. and you know, they're toxic. And you know, great wealth is toxic. And a lot of regular people who win the lotto, they end up in a terrible situation. And there's so much evidence of that. You know, and if I was to ever get great riches, I would still drive my crappy car. This is the thing about us, is that we have to know who we are and stop kind of wishing or hoping for something that actually is entirely unsuitable. And so, you know who's actually crossed this Rubicon really rather well? That is Mark Cuban. He's been doing some brilliant campaigning for Kamala Harris, and she's been keeping a distance a little bit because I don't think she wants to associate with billionaires necessarily. But he is brilliant at exposing Donald Trump's terrible economic plans, and he is an honest billionaire, you know, like Richard Branson, somebody who just talks with such clarity. And this is really the kind of person that maybe needs to be speaking up for the Democrats, to understand that it is possible to be on the right side of history in this moment.
The last thing I'll say is we're getting a peek into the coming administration. You see RFK Jr. now being covered in a more, I think, in a higher profile way, and in a more complete way, maybe is the one word I would use, because he's now speaking specifically about what he would do. And I guess Trump is ready to let him run the CDC, let him take charge of the EPA is going to be closed down under a Trump administration. He says, I'm going to let him go wild on the food. I'm going to let him go wild on the medicines, Trump said. And this Make America Healthy Again PAC is saying that they are going to prioritize regenerative agriculture, preserving natural habitats. I mean, this all sounds fine, eliminating toxins from food, water, but we know the truth about RFK Jr., and he is a conspiracy theorist who is surrounded by other conspiracy theorists. I mean, you realize that Trump will be on the golf course. I mean, he'll give the keys to the car to people like RFK Jr. and Elon Musk, I think.
Well, he's already checked out. Donald Trump doesn't want to work. He doesn't want to do anything. He didn't enjoy having to work the last time because he's never worked in his life. He's just pretended to be like a playboy, but he's only ever worked for himself. He's completely unemployable, never had a job. Those 15 minutes that he was in McDonald's recently, that kind of publicity stunt, was the most he's ever worked. And so, yeah, he's now kind of handing out these positions because I think he knows he's not going to win. And so it doesn't really matter. It's all just
performative. Yes,
yeah,
performative.
It's just a show.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.